Hello, everyone. I am going to give a short introduction to global and transnational literature by introducing five theorists who theorize global/transnational literature based on Modernism in Global Context by Peter Kalliney, published in 2016. Before we go in, we need to have a look at the relationship between modernism and global or transnational literature, because the modernism period is when circulation of literature began through and along with imperialist expansion. To put it simply, modernism influenced global dimension of literature by allowing cultural and literary encounters to happen around the globe. We must note that although the imperialism was a key element in transnational turn in regional literature, the cultural exchanges did not always happen one way, from the empire to colonies. The literary and cultural relationships between regions are more complicated and unexpected than our typical understanding of the power dynamics. According to Peter Kalliney, there are five important theorists who theorize approaches to global or transnational literature. Those names are David Damrosch, Franco Moretti, Pascal Casanova, Gayatri Spivak, and Paul Gilroy. We will briefly look at five theorists and what they said about literature of the world, or approaches to global or transnational literature. First is Damrosch. Damrosch is an adamant supporter of translated literature beyond their origins. He emphasizes the reader's experience of reading the book more than how those books are created, produced, or understood in their places of origin, whether those books are translated or not. In other words, Damrosch puts an emphasis on the receiver of the literature, often the colonized or regions under the influence of superpowers, rather than the imperial imposer or how literature is imposed. Damrosch does not lament what is lost in translation. Rather, he celebrates this translation process as gaining of meanings. Those who criticize Damrosch's approach point out how his approach relies heavily on close reading of the texts, which might not always be the case. On the other hand, Moretti argues that world literature is better registered through distant readings of circulations of texts. He is in favor of a quantitative approach to global literature to see the flow and circulation of literature in the world system to gain a big picture. Moretti's critics argue against him by asserting his research method is narrow in the sense that it imposes a unilateral understanding of how novels move, and broad in the sense that it demands a large quantity of data in order to have a big picture. His method becomes hence difficult to reveal intricacies of power dynamics. Next is Pascal Casanova. Casanova focuses on the nation as a culturally significant unit. A French theorist herself, she focuses on and criticizes Paris as a cultural center that shaped the world literary system, which defined what the global literature is. Her argument is that languages and nations are interested in becoming the cultural capital, and thus they play a significant role in gaining global recognition as tasteful, trendy, and having authority. Criticism on Casanova mostly comes from how her own criticism of the cultural center reproduces the same power structure by having the apparent Parisian bias, where she is unable to deny the central position of the Parisian recognition. Next, Paul Gilroy pays attention to the passage itself when thinking about modernism and movements of literature or critical thought. He argues that African slaves who moved through the Atlantic embody microsystems of linguistic and political hybridity. He says the shared experience of the Middle Passage and slavery made Black Atlantic thinkers the most advanced, most progressive thinkers of the day. They, the Black diasporic thinkers, become paradoxically more modern than their contemporaries and also emphatically anti-modern at the same time. In his opinion, cultures are inherently hybrid formations, and so are aesthetic forms. On a different note, Gayatri Spivak's view of the world is best described as criticism of globalization and theorization of planetarity as a vision of the world which invokes the planet as a category of thought over and against the globe. Her point of view comes from the idea that humans are merely borrowing the earth and it is the planet that should be the subject of our consideration of the world and world literature. Her emphasis in reading literature of the planet is gender and cultural differences. She always stresses gender as the rule of operations, which will help us recognize the magnitude of the planet and the fiction of the autonomous subject. She also thinks endeavors to understand cultural differences is important when studying fiction of the world by learning other languages and cultures at the periphery of the world. And here is a possible discussion question. Which theorists do you most agree with and why? This is the end of today's talk. Thank you for listening.